My daughter-in-law smiled at my husband's funeral, then asked for my house. That smile is still stuck in my mind. I was standing there, holding a white rose, looking at the casket of my husband Robert, the man I had loved for 31 years, and my daughter-in-law Melissa looked at me from across the room and smiled. Not a sad smile, not a comforting smile. A real, calm, satisfied smile, like someone who just won something. My name is Linda Carter. I am 53 years old, and until that day I thought I understood my family. I thought I knew who loved me and who was just waiting. That funeral taught me the truth, and what happened after taught me even more. Let me take you back a little, so you understand how we got there. Robert and I built our life from nothing. When we got married, we had one small apartment and a car that barely started in winter. He worked construction, long hours, dust on his boots every single evening, and I worked as a school secretary, answering phones and comforting crying children who skinned their knees. Slowly, year after year, we saved. We bought a small piece of land on the edge of town, and Robert built our house with his own hands, literally, board by board, on weekends and holidays, while I held the flashlight and handed him nails. That house was not just wood and paint to us. It was every sacrifice we made, every dream we shared, every fight we survived, every anniversary we celebrated in the kitchen with cheap wine because we could not afford anything fancier in the early years. We raised one son, Jason. He was our whole world. I remember teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway of that house, Robert running beside him with one hand on the seat, both of them laughing so hard they nearly fell. I remember Jason's graduation, his wedding day, the day he told us Melissa was pregnant with our first grandchild. We were proud parents. We thought we had done everything right. Jason married Melissa 6 years ago. She was polite in the beginning, always smiling, always complimenting my cooking, always agreeing with everything Robert and I said. I told myself she was just shy, still adjusting to a new family. I did not see back then that some smiles are not warmth, some smiles are patience. She was waiting. I remember the first time she came for Sunday dinner, before the wedding, when Jason introduced her nervously at the front door. She wore a soft blue dress and brought a bottle of wine she clearly could not afford, and she complimented every single room she walked through. "What a lovely kitchen," she said. "What gorgeous crown molding," she said, running her fingers along the doorframe Robert had carved by hand one winter when Jason was still in middle school. At the time I thought, what a sweet girl, she notices details. Looking back now, with everything I know, I wonder if she was already doing math in her head, the way some people cannot help but calculate the value of anything beautiful they see. I am not saying every compliment was calculated. I am saying I have learned, painfully, that I cannot always tell the difference anymore, and that itself is a kind of loss. Their wedding was lovely, small, held in a garden 2 towns over. Robert cried during his toast, the only time I ever saw him cry in public, talking about how proud he was of the man Jason had become. Melissa hugged him tightly afterward and told him she was so happy to be part of our family. I believed her completely back then. I had no reason not to. For the first couple of years, things seemed normal, the way family life usually is, full of small holidays and small disagreements and small joys. Melissa gave birth to our first granddaughter, Emma, and then 2 years later our second, Grace. Robert doted on those girls in a way I had never seen him dote on anyone, not even Jason as a baby. He built them a wooden playhouse in the backyard. The same careful craftsmanship he put into everything, complete with little shutters he painted yellow because Emma loved sunflowers. I thought, watching him work on that playhouse for weeks, that this was what real family looked like, generations woven together through effort and love, not calculation. Robert got sick almost 2 years ago. It started small, fatigue, a cough that would not go away, and by the time the doctors found it, it had already spread. I will not go into all the medical details because honestly, reliving them still makes my hands shake. What I will tell you is that for 18 months I sat beside hospital beds, I learned to give injections, I learned the names of medicines I never wanted to know, and I watched the strongest man I have ever known become smaller every single day. During all of that, do you know who visited the least? Jason and Melissa. Jason came sometimes, always looking at his phone, always in a hurry, always with some excuse about work. Melissa came exactly 3 times in 18 months, 3 times, and every single time she did not come to see Robert. She came to look around the house. I caught her once, standing in our living room, not looking at her father-in-law who was struggling to breathe in the next room, but looking up at the ceiling fan Robert had installed himself, at the crown molding he had carved by hand. She was not looking at a home. She was appraising a property. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself grief was making me paranoid. I wanted so badly to believe that my son's wife cared about us the way we cared about our own family. Robert passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. I was holding his hand. His last words to me were simple. He said, "Take care of our house, Linda. Do not let anyone take what we built." At the time, I thought he meant it in a general way, advice about being careful with money after he was gone. I did not understand what he truly meant until 3 days later. The funeral was held on a Saturday. It rained a little that morning, then cleared up by the time we reached the funeral home. I remember every detail with strange clarity, the way grief sometimes burns memories into you instead of blurring them. I remember the white flowers Robert loved. I remember his old friends from the construction crew, grown men with rough hands, crying quietly in the back row. I remember Jason standing beside me, his arm around my shoulder, tears actually real on his face, because whatever else he was, he did love his father in his own confused way. And I remember Melissa. She wore black, of course, everyone did, but there was something in the way she carried herself that felt wrong. She was not slumped in grief. She stood straight, almost proud. During the eulogy, while I was struggling to breathe through my own words, trying to describe 31 years of marriage in 5 minutes, I looked up and saw her checking her phone. Then she caught me looking, and she smiled. That same calm, satisfied smile. It was quick, gone in a second, replaced by a practiced sad expression, but I saw it. A mother never unsees something like that. I told myself again that I was wrong. That grief was making me see enemies where there were none. I finished the eulogy. We buried Robert next to his own parents. Under the oak tree, he used to talk about wanting to be buried near, and we went back to the house, our house, for the small gathering afterward. People brought food. Casseroles, sandwiches, the usual comfort of neighbors who do not know what else to offer except carbohydrates and sympathy. I was in the kitchen, numb, going through motions, thanking people for coming, when Melissa found me alone by the counter. She hugged me. It felt stiff, mechanical, like a hug performed for an audience rather than felt. Then she stepped back, still holding my hands, and she said, "Linda, I know this is such a hard day. And I hate to bring anything up, but Jason and I have been talking, and we think it makes the most sense if you sign the house over to us now. You are alone here, it is too big for one person, and honestly, with the girls getting older, we really need more space. We already talked to a lawyer, we can have the papers ready by next week. I want you to understand something. My husband's body was barely in the ground. The flowers on his grave had not even had time to wilt, and his son's wife was asking me to give up the home he built with his own hands on the very day we buried him." I did not scream. I did not cry, not right then, though I wanted to. I simply looked at her and asked her to repeat what she said, because some part of me hoped I had misheard through my own grief and exhaustion. She repeated it, word for word, this time adding that it was really for the best, that at my age I would probably want to downsize anyway, that living alone in a big house was not safe. At my age, I was 53 years old, not 93. 53, and apparently already being measured for a smaller life by a woman who had visited her dying father-in-law 3 times in 18 months. I looked over her shoulder and saw Jason across the room, laughing quietly with one of his old friends, completely unaware, or maybe completely aware, and simply letting his wife do the dirty work. I excused myself, said I needed air, and walked out to the backyard where Robert had built a small wooden bench under the maple tree. I sat there for a long time, alone, while the sounds of the gathering continued inside without me. That night, after everyone left, after Jason and Melissa took their daughters home, I sat in the living room by myself for the first time as a widow. I looked at the walls Robert had painted, the floor he had laid, the doorframe with pencil marks measuring Jason's height every year until he turned 18. I thought about Robert's last words to me. "Take care of our house, Linda. Do not let anyone take what we built." It was not general advice. He knew. Somehow, in his final days, weak as he was, he had seen what I refused to see. He was warning me. I did not sleep that night. I sat with a cup of tea that went cold, and I made a decision. I was not going to be the sad, broken widow that people could push around because grief makes you soft and slow. I was going to protect what Robert and I built, and I was going to find out exactly what my son and his wife had been planning, and for how long. The next morning, I called Robert's old friend, a man named Harold who had been a lawyer for over 30 years and had helped us with small things over the years, like our wills. I asked him directly, "Harold, is there any way Jason or Melissa could legally take this house from me?" He laughed gently and told me no, the house was solely in my name, along with Robert's, and now fully mine through the will. They had no legal claim whatsoever unless I chose to give it to them. That relieved me for about 5 minutes, until Harold said something else. He said, "Linda, actually, Robert came to see me about 2 months ago. He wanted to make some changes to his will." I did not know this. Robert never told me. Harold explained that Robert had come in alone, weak but determined, and asked Harold to add a clause. He wanted to leave a letter, sealed, to be given to me exactly 30 days after his passing, along with some financial documents. Harold said Robert made him promise not to tell me anything until that day arrived, no matter what happened. I asked Harold why. He said Robert told him if Linda finds out too early, she might do something rash out of anger. I want her to grieve first and then understand everything clearly with a calm mind. I hung up the phone and cried harder than I had at the funeral. My husband, even sick, even dying, had been protecting me, thinking 3 steps ahead, while I had been too consumed by loss. To notice anything was wrong until it hit me in the face at his own funeral. Over the next month, I kept my distance from Jason and Melissa. I was polite when they called. I saw my granddaughters twice for short visits, but I did not discuss the house again. Melissa brought it up once more on the phone, saying she did not want things to be awkward between us, that she was just being practical about family planning. I told her calmly that I was still grieving and was not ready to discuss anything about the house. She sounded annoyed, but she backed off for the moment. During that month, I started noticing things I had ignored before. I remembered Melissa asking Robert, months before he passed, very casually, whether the house was fully paid off, whether there was a mortgage remaining. I remembered her asking about the property value, disguised as small talk during a barbecue. I remembered Jason mentioning, almost in passing, that his job situation was not going well, that he and Melissa were struggling with money, though he always played it down like it was nothing serious. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. They were not just grieving parents and a widow. They were a couple under financial pressure, looking at an asset, and the asset happened to be my home. I also started remembering smaller things that had seemed harmless in isolation, but now formed a pattern too clear to ignore. Melissa once asked me, while helping fold laundry, whether Robert and I had ever considered downsizing, since the house felt like a lot of upkeep for 2 people getting older. I remembered brushing it off as concern. I remembered her asking, another time, whether the deed was in both our names or just Robert's, phrased so casually, wrapped inside a conversation about estate planning shows she liked watching on television. I remembered a dinner, maybe 8 months before Robert passed, where she brought up, unprompted, a friend of hers whose in-laws had generously transferred their home early to avoid, in her words, complications later. At the time I thought she was simply making conversation. Now I understood she had been planting seeds for months, maybe longer, testing how we would react, watching our faces for any opening she could use later. I began writing these memories down in a small notebook I kept by my bed, not out of spite, but because I needed somewhere to put the growing weight of understanding that had settled into my chest. Each memory I wrote felt like picking up a stone I had walked past 100 times without noticing it was sharp. 30 days after Robert's passing, exactly as he had planned, Harold called and asked me to come to his office. I sat across from him, and he handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's handwriting, shaky near the end from his illness but unmistakably his. I opened it there in the office, my hands trembling. The letter began, "My dearest Linda, if you are reading this, 30 days have passed, and I hope you have had time to breathe, even a little. I am sorry I could not tell you all of this while I was still strong enough to say it properly." He wrote that in his final months, weak as he was, he had grown suspicious of Melissa's questions, her sudden interest in the house's value, her comments about space and family needs that felt rehearsed rather than natural. He wrote that one evening, While I was out getting his prescriptions refilled, Jason had visited him alone and, thinking his father was too sick to fully understand or remember, had a conversation with him about the house. Robert wrote down, as clearly as he could remember, that Jason told him they were in serious debt, more serious than either of us knew, and that Melissa had convinced him the fastest solution was to get the house transferred to their name so they could either sell it or use it as collateral for a loan. Robert wrote that Jason even said, "Dad, once you're gone. It would just make things easier if it was already sorted out, so Mom does not have to deal with paperwork during a hard time." They were planning this while Robert was still alive. Sitting beside his sickbed, my own son was already discussing how to take the house once his father died, using the excuse of making things easier for me, when really it was making things easier for them. Robert wrote that this was why he made the changes to his will, and asked Harold to prepare additional legal protections. He had placed the house into a specific type of trust, one that ensured it could never be transferred, sold, or used as collateral without my explicit, sober, and independently verified consent, verified by a third-party lawyer, precisely to prevent anyone from pressuring me during a vulnerable time. He also, and this part truly broke me, had taken out an additional small life insurance policy in secret, money he had saved from odd jobs on the side without telling me, specifically to make sure I would never feel financially desperate enough to consider giving up the house just to solve a short-term problem. The letter ended with words I will remember until my last breath. He wrote, "Linda, you gave me the best years of any man's life. I built that house with my hands, but you built our home with your heart. Do not let guilt or family pressure or the fear of seeming unkind take away the one thing that is truly, legally, and rightfully yours. Our son has to find his own way, even if it is a hard lesson. I love you always, Robert." I sat in Harold's office and wept, not just from grief, but from a strange, powerful gratitude, the feeling of being protected even after losing the person who protected me most. I want to be honest with you now, because this story is not about revenge for the sake of revenge, though yes, there is a part of this story about consequences, about standing your ground. What I did next was not cruel. It was clear. I called Jason and asked him to come over for dinner, just the two of us, no Melissa, no children. He seemed surprised but agreed. I made his favorite meal, the same roast chicken I used to make when he was a teenager, and we sat at the same kitchen table where he did his homework as a child. I told him everything. I told him about Harold, about the letter, about what his father had written regarding the conversation they had while I was out getting medicine. I watched my grown son's face go through shock, then denial, then a slow, painful shame. He tried to explain, saying it was Melissa's idea, that he was scared, that their debt was worse than he had told anyone, nearly $40,000 from bad investments Melissa had convinced him to make, plus credit card debt they had been hiding from everyone, including from me. I told him I understood being scared. I told him I understood financial pressure, because his father and I had lived through lean years too, years of counting coins for groceries. But I told him there is a difference between asking your mother for help honestly and scheming behind a dying father's back to take an entire house through pressure and guilt. I told him that what hurt me most was not the request itself. It was the timing. It was doing it at the funeral. It was letting his wife smile at his own father's burial because she thought her plan was working. Jason cried at that table, real tears, the kind that come from actual shame rather than performance. He apologized over and over and asked what he could do to fix things. I did not disown him. I did not throw him out of my life, because despite everything, he is still my son, and Robert would not have wanted me to lose our child over this, only to protect what we built together. But I told him clearly, the house stays in my name, permanently, protected by the trust his father set up, and it will remain that way for the rest of my life. I told him if he and Melissa needed financial help, we could sit down, honestly, with Harold present, and talk about real solutions, budgeting, possibly a modest loan with clear terms, counseling for their finances, anything reasonable and honest. But there would be no more talk of the house, ever again. Then I asked him to bring Melissa the following weekend, because there was one more thing I needed to say, and I needed to say it to both of them together. When they arrived, Melissa walked in with that same practiced smile, clearly expecting a friendly family dinner, perhaps even expecting a conversation about finally moving forward with the house transfer, since Jason had told her we talked. I sat them both down in the living room, the room with Robert's handmade shelves, his handmade doorframe, his history built into every wall. I told Melissa I knew everything. I told her about the letter, about the conversation with dying Robert, about her questions regarding mortgage and property value disguised as small talk, about her smile at the funeral, which I had not imagined at all. I watched her face change from confusion to something colder, almost calculating, as she realized her plan had completely unraveled. She tried to argue, saying I was misunderstanding innocent conversations, that grief was making me paranoid, the exact same tactic I had used on myself for months. But this time, I was not confused. I was not grieving alone in silence. I had Robert's own written words, and I had Jason sitting right there, unable to deny what he had already admitted to me privately. She tried a few more angles, the way people do when they feel a plan slipping away from them. She said she only wanted what was best for the grandchildren, more space, a better school district. As if taking my home was somehow a gift she was offering the girls rather than something she was taking from me. She said Jason had misunderstood his father, that sick people sometimes remember conversations incorrectly. Medication can confuse memory, grief can distort things. I let her finish every excuse without interrupting, because I wanted her to hear herself, to hear how each explanation contradicted the one before it. When she finally ran out of things to say, the room went quiet except for the ticking of the clock Robert had hung above the fireplace himself, a small wooden clock he built the winter before Jason was born. I told her calmly, without shouting, that I did not hate her. I told her that fear does strange things to people, and financial desperation can make even a person with a good heart do things that later feel unrecognizable to themselves. I told her I hoped, one day, she would understand that family is not something you calculate or appraise like property. I told her that Robert and I built that house through decades of sacrifice, and it was not, and would never be, a solution to someone else's poor financial choices. Then, and this is the part I want you to understand clearly, because this is where the story becomes about grace rather than only about justice, I told them both that I forgave them, not because what they did was small, it was not small, it cut deeper than almost anything in my life, but because holding on to that bitterness would only poison the years I have left, years that already feel shorter without Robert beside me. I told Jason I forgave him because he is my son, and shame had already punished him enough without me adding more weight to it. I told Melissa I forgave her too, not because she had earned it in that moment, but because forgiveness was never really about her. It was about the kind of person I chose to remain, even after being hurt this badly. I did set boundaries though, real ones, not soft, symbolic ones. I told them financial help going forward would only ever be structured, transparent, and reasonable, arranged properly through Harold, never emotional, never rushed, and never again touching the house. I told Melissa that if I ever caught her measuring my home with her eyes again, thinking about its value instead of the people who built it, our relationship as family would end there, completely and permanently, no more chances. Melissa did cry that night, real tears this time, not performance, and she apologized, saying she had let fear and pressure turn her into someone she did not recognize. I do not know, even now, months later, if she has truly changed or if she is simply better at hiding her calculations. But I do know Jason has changed. He visits me every week now, genuinely, not out of guilt or strategy. He brings my granddaughters over, and we sit in the backyard on the wooden bench Robert built. And I tell them stories about their grandfather, about the man who built this house board by board, about the man who, even while dying, thought 3 steps ahead to protect the woman he loved for 31 years. Little Emma asked me once why Grandpa built the whole house himself instead of hiring someone else to do it faster. I told her that some things are built slowly on purpose, because the slowness is what makes them last, and because a house built with patience holds its walls together differently than one built in a hurry. She did not fully understand yet, she is only 6, but I hope one day she will remember those words, when she is old enough to build something of her own, whether that is a home, a marriage, or simply a life she can be proud of. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the house is quiet and the light hits the living room the way it used to when Robert was alive, I sit in his old chair. the worn leather one he refused to replace for 20 years, and I talked to him, just quietly, just for myself. The way I imagine widows all over the world do when the silence in a house becomes too heavy to carry alone. I tell him, I kept my promise, Robert. I did not let anyone take what we built. I protected our home, and I protected our son as best I could without losing the softness in my own heart. The softness you always told me was the best part of me. And somehow, in the silence of that house he made with his own hands, board by board, nail by nail, I feel like he already knows. That is my story from beginning to end, told exactly as I lived it, exactly as I remember it. If you have been listening to this story, I want to ask you something, and I would love for you to answer me honestly in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from today, tell me your city, wherever in the world you are watching from tonight. I read every single comment, and it truly means the world to me to know how far these stories travel. And if this story touched you even a little, if you believe grandmothers deserve respect, protection, and the last word in their own homes, then please hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it too. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. Until next time, take care of the people who truly built your life, and never let anyone smile their way into taking what is rightfully yours.